Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the ET Base podcast. Today, I'm here with my co host, Star, to present yet another interesting aspect of contact and how it's progressing and how it's developing. How are you today, Star?
I'm doing very well. How are you, David?
I'm great, thanks. We have a very special guest today. What we want to do today is to interview someone we know from some of the channeling group in connection with things like Bashar and some others. We want to welcome today Allison Hartman. She is an ET experiencer. She's been having experiences in different times throughout her life. And so we'll be interviewing her today to get another perspective on how these things happen and to hear her story. So welcome very much, Allison. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. I appreciate you, David and Star, for having me. I can't wait to tell about my story.
Well, we can't wait to hear it. So that's really good. So we always like to portray things as sort of a story because for us, that's how people relate to things most. So let's start with your basic background. When you were small and growing up, where did you grow up and what kind of family? Was there anything in particular we should know about in terms of things that you experienced in your childhood? And we'll get to your UFO experiences in a minute.
Mhm.
But just a background, kind of a general thing, if you want to share that with us.
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty small town called Greenbrier, Arkansas, which is about 40 minutes or so from Little Rock, which is the capital of Arkansas. So we're kind of far out. I still live there now. I've lived in Greenbrier most of my life, but definitely grew up there. And I had a twin sister and an older brother who was about 18 months older than us. And we just lived with our parents right on the highway. We had a big yellow two-story house and lived right on the highway until, I graduated. And, we just kind of had the normal growing up in the 80s type of life. We played outside a lot. Nothing really significant. I mean, other than being a twin, I thought that at times it was a disadvantage and other times it was an advantage. But people can always tell us apart because I have a birthmark on my right arm that to me looks like a spaceship, but my dad used to call it my little battleship. So, and that will come into play in one of my stories as well, the birthmark. So hopefully we can get to that. But yeah, pretty insignificant childhood, very normal, other than, being a twin.
Great. So I have a question for you. I heard a little bit about your story, and you had a very sort of significant experience with ETs that became a strong catalyst for you in your life when you were about 5 years old. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Could you share maybe a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would love to. And it's funny you say catalyst because looking back now, I feel like it truly was I don't know if I want to call it the first initiation or communication or awareness or whatever word might be best. I don't probably even have a good word to describe it, but this memory is burned so strongly into my mind that even now, so this happened when I was 5, I'm 40 now. I literally think about it every single day. Even if it's just, a passing second, I just see it every day in my mind. It was that just visceral and significant to me back then. So I was 5 years old. So this would have been 1989. And we lived right on Highway 65 that runs through Greenbrier. And it was just a 2-lane highway back then. So the front of our house had this big porch on the front of it. And, we had we had like a porch swing, and my mom was a school teacher, so we had like old school desks out on the front porch and chairs and just different things like that. And one evening, so this was in the middle of the night, I was, asleep, and I shared a room at the time with my sister and my brother. And we slept in the front room of the house, which was the closest to the highway. So it was really important at night for us to have our curtains closed, or else we were just constantly going to be bombarded by headlights, coming in and hitting us in the face while we were trying to sleep. So one of the things that we always did before we go to bed is our parents made sure that our curtains were closed. And on this particular night, I had got up. I couldn't tell you what time it was. I'm sure it was just sometime in the middle of the night, probably midnight. and needed to go to the bathroom. So I walk back to the bathroom and I come back to our room. And before I even walk into the room, while I'm kind of in the doorway, looking into the room, the first thing I notice is that the curtain that faces the highway was wide open. And there were Snoopy curtains. If you're familiar with the, Charlie Brown cartoons, I remember the curtains very specifically. And I'm thinking, why are the curtains open? My siblings are still asleep. My parents are asleep. I would have heard them get up, while I was walking back and forth through the house. And so I thought that was really strange. But immediately, right after I had that thought, I realized that there was something in the window. And I kind of froze there because I wasn't really sure what to think. But like I said earlier, we had on our front porch school desks and things like that. And there was one school desk that was right against the window, on the outside of the window there on the front porch. And there was what I perceived to be an alien sitting in that school desk. And it was your typical, I think of it as like the stereotypical gray alien that you see on various movies and TV shows that have been depicted, especially in the earlier years of that stuff being in TVs and movies. And it was just looking at me. And I didn't really know what to think. I couldn't see it fully. It wasn't standing. I do remember thinking it's strange that it wasn't standing up. Why is it sitting down? And its arms were like on the top of the desk, kind of outstretched, slightly bent at the elbows. And the way the desk was facing, it wasn't fully facing the window. So if you were sitting in the school desk, you would be facing south. But I was looking out the window, which was looking west. So the alien had to turn its head and to be able to actually look at me through the window. So it was just sitting there like a statue, just totally still. And at this point, I was standing in the middle of my room just looking at it, and I didn't really know what to think. I remember thinking at least that if I screamed, that I was going to wake up my brother and my sister, and I knew I didn't want to do that. I don't really remember being scared per se, but I at least remember having that thought like, oh, I probably don't need to scream. That's probably not a great idea. And I just kind of slowly walked over to my bed. Me and my sister shared like a trundle bed. So she was in the upper part of the bed and I was in the trundle part that like rolls in and out underneath. And so I crawled into bed, and since my bed was so low, it was underneath the north facing window that kind of looked out into our backyard. And this thing is still just looking at me through the window. It's just, I don't know if it continued to turn its head. I was kind of scared to look at it a little bit more, but I thought something is telling me to look out the other window, which that curtain was still closed. Not both of them were open. It was just one of them that was open. So I kind of peeked through the other curtain that looks out into our backyard, and I saw a small spaceship like right there by the window. It was really, really close. We have we live in Tornado Alley in the South. So everybody has a storm cellar or some type of something that they get in whenever we have, tornado warnings and stuff. So we had a storm cellar that was about 20 feet away from the window that I was looking out of. And so between the storm cellar and the window, there was this ship, but it was really, really small. I would say, a family van. It was probably about as long as a van and about as tall as a van. It was sort of cylindrical in shape, but I would say that the dome on the top of it was more pronounced than the dome on the bottom. It was a little bit more flat on the bottom, but not completely, as far as the underside of it. And it was sitting on like a tripod, like tripod legs. And I remember thinking like how small it was and that this alien probably must have come by himself. And I say he, I don't know if it was, male, female or whatever. It's just, I kind of got like the impression that his identity was male or at least masculine or something like that. And the ship had a sort of ring of lights around the edge of it, all different colors. red and green and yellow and white. And I just calmly closed the curtain, laid down in my bed, and I pulled my blanket up over my head and kind of was clenching it with my hands, pretty close to my forehead. And I remember falling asleep pretty quickly after that. And then the next morning, I open my eyes and I still have my blanket over my head and I can see, the daylight through it. And I realize, okay, it's daytime now. I'm awake. Like, was that really real? But I pulled my blanket down and I looked around. The curtain was still open that faced the highway. And I just remember being so excited that I had seen an alien. Like, I wanted to tell everyone. So I tell my sister, I tell my brother, I tell my parents. And of course, they're like laughing at me initially, but I just kept talking about it. And they thought, and my dad had a previous experience. I found out much, much later that him and some of his friends had a sighting when I was like an infant. And so he, I think, believed me pretty much right off the bat. I don't know if my mom, she needed a little bit more convincing, but they just thought it was just a funny story. And I remember they would have people come over to play cards or whatever, friend gatherings, family gatherings, and they would tell people my story too. And I just would tell anybody I met. I thought it was just the coolest thing that, hey, I have this story about seeing an alien.
I just would like to backtrack a little bit to the actual encounter as it was happening. Can you recall any sort of feeling that you got or telepathic communication from the being? Like, were you sensing any presence before you saw it? Did you sense any communication that was happening?
Great question. The answer is pretty much no to all of the above. I didn't get any, at least I don't remember feeling any type of communication going between us. I didn't feel, well, I guess I'll say this. I kind of just felt like it was just there to see me. And now that I'm thinking about it now, I've had so many experiences since then. It is kind of strange that there's a void in my memory about what really was I feeling, because everything else since then has been very obvious. Even if there wasn't telepathic communication, it was just almost like I had a feeling of exactly what I know is getting ready to happen or what I can expect. And in this one, it was almost intentionally a void.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because I just wonder, because they say that a lot of encounters happen in an altered state so that we don't freak out or that we're not scared. So I'm wondering, did you feel any actual, like, what was going through your mind when you actually saw the being? Did you have any fear? Did your body respond in any way? Anything like that?
I remember just kind of standing and being super still and not knowing. I wouldn't say I felt frozen, like it was being forced upon me to feel that way. But I do remember I saw it immediately when I started walking into the room, and then I stopped right in front of the window and just stared at it, and it stared at me. And I'm not sure exactly how long that went on, but I just remember thinking that it looked like a statue. Why isn't it moving? And I don't remember having fear, but I do remember having the thought of, if I scream, it's going to wake my brother and sister up, and then they'd be mad at me, and I didn't want anybody to be mad at me. So I was more afraid about other people being mad at me for waking them up than what I was seeing. Other than that, yeah, it's just, there wasn't a lot of other thoughts that were really going through my head other than why isn't it moving? What is it doing? It's just looking at me.
It almost feels
felt
like it just wanted you to see it almost and just sort of remember that too, right? Because a lot of contacts,
yeah.
People don't remember, right? So the fact that you were conscious through the whole thing and that you recalled it the next day and that you saw it, almost makes me think that that was clearly an encounter made for you specifically so that you would have a conscious memory of it, of that there's something going on, right?
I think so, because again, I literally think about it every single day. I feel like it has a purpose. And I did for many, many years ask myself, what's the significance of the school desk? Why was it sitting in the school desk? Why wasn't it just standing on the other side of it? Why wasn't it, I don't know, standing in the room? Why, like, I just felt like there had to be a significant reason why it was sitting in the school desk that way. And I actually remember asking a channeler about it several years later, and he said something like that it was significant. It has to do with learning, and I sort of my path has a lot to do with learning and teaching, just in a nutshell. And that kind of, when I realized that, it kind of hit me hard, and I was like, you know what? I wonder if that was the whole message, if that was one of the whole reasons why I saw that and remember it every day, is that that's part of my path. It's a significant part of my life. It is something that I do. I feel like being a lifelong learner is super important, especially in this area, in the whole alien, ET, UFO, UAP area. It's been a huge driving force in my life, as well as I have worked with children as well. So I don't know, maybe it was a little like nod from that being or from the universe or whatever, that this is going to be part of your life. And that's why it presented itself in that way in the school desk.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a message to you. Like it was teaching you some things, and then you could teach other people as well about what's going on, about these encounters, so on and so forth. David, did you have any questions in regard to this encounter for Allison?
Yeah, I had one question. I remember when you shared this earlier, you mentioned that after the encounter, you had like a sensation like they were following up on you and like they
Oh,
were checking you out.
yeah. So sort of part two of this is this didn't happen in the same, day. I would say for the next 6 months or so after this, and it didn't happen every time I went to the, bathroom or anything, but I'd say about a half a dozen times or so, whenever I would go to the bathroom, which, I mean, we were a family of 5, but we only had one bathroom, and I shared a room with my siblings, and, we were always around each other. So if I went to the bathroom, it was the only place in the house that I could be alone. And I feel like that's why they chose that particular place. But sometimes I would be in there and I'd just be, sitting there doing my business. And all of a sudden in the room, there would be this, like, I can only describe it as a green cartoon looking alien dog would just kind of appear in the room. And if you can envision this, think of like a weenie dog, a wiener dog. They're short, stubby legs. They have the long bodies and kind of little floppy ears. So it kind of looked like that type of dog, except for it was bright green, glowing, and had these concentric circles that were, I don't know, made out of skin, I guess. It didn't look like necklaces or anything like that. It was the same color and everything and texture of the skin of this thing, but it had concentric rings around its neck as well as the tip of its tail. And I remember thinking that this was them, like, quote unquote, them, whoever them was out there just coming to check on me. And it would kind of float around the bathroom. It was like, it looked to me like it was a solid object, but it never touched the floor. It would just kind of float around the room pretty close to the floor, but never actually touch it. And I just thought it was like the cutest little thing. I called it Bernard. I don't remember it trying to talk to me, but I would speak to it and be like, oh, hi, like, what's going on? Whatever I would say as a kid, I don't really remember. I just remember talking to it and thinking it was so cute. And like, I was so glad it was there. And it felt like I was just sort of being checked on, like they're just making sure that I'm okay. And at some point that stopped. And I do remember telling, especially my mom, about this after probably it happened a couple of times. And at that point, she just said, oh, you just have an imaginary friend. And I was like, well, not really. It felt extremely real to me. I mean, it was just like seeing my own, we had dogs and cats and stuff. It was that real.
So actually, that was going to be another question to you because you have siblings and you said they were asleep during this encounter. But I'm curious, have you talked to them about this since? And do you know if they've also had certain experiences? Because it's very common for families to be involved. Not always, of course, but that is something we hear a lot. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, how did you discuss this with your family, if at all, and what was their response to it?
I don't remember when I was little talking to my brother and sister about, especially the dog. I only remember telling my mom, and her response was she just kind of blew me off. So I didn't feel like it was important to really talk about it. It was just something I thought, well, this is just for me, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And I don't remember talking to them about it, but I will say that probably about 2.5 years ago, once I started to really have lots of experiences again, I had a huge, huge shift in my life. And I really began to realize that this is a huge part of my identity. And I was going through just a personal growth phase and trying to figure out who am I and what do I want and what am I creating in life. And I just realized like this is a huge part of my life, but I can't talk to anybody about it. But that's a limiting belief system. Sure, I can talk to people about it. Well, okay, who can I talk to about it first that I'm comfortable enough that I won't feel judged? So I did start to open up to my family, especially my sister. Being a twin, we're super, super close. I mean, we don't talk every single day, but, we pick up right where we left off every time we talk, several times, a week. And so I started to talk to her again about that and ask her, like, do you remember anything? Did you have any experiences? And we followed channelers and things like that for years, so we would talk about the subject of ETs and stuff over the years, but I never really brought up my personal experiences until about 2.5 years ago, again, just to see, does she even remember me talking about it? Is this something that, is she remembering it the same as I'm telling it? And trying to get sort of a pulse on what was her thoughts. And she was very super interested in it, and she would share with me that she would have a dream about me and an alien or whatever, but she never had any experiences herself. My brother, who's a little bit older than us, he hasn't had any experiences either. I remember calling my parents about 2 years ago and saying, hey, do you remember when I was 5 and I saw that alien in the window and, the little green dog? And I kind of reminded him about the story. And the funniest thing is neither one of them remember anything about it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because I have such a strong, strong memory of talking about it so much when I was little, because I just thought it was the coolest thing. And they don't remember it. I'm like, do you really not? And I talked to them because they weren't at the same place when I called. Like my dad was at home and my mom, I don't know, she was out at the store or something, but they weren't in the same place. And neither one of them could remember. Now, my parents are older and, their memories are not the best, but I'm like, surely, you would remember. So I called back both my brother and my sister later that day and said, Mom and Dad say they don't remember. I don't understand. You remember us talking about it? And they're like, yeah, yeah. And my brother even was like, yeah, I remember when they'd have people over to play cards and they'd tell so-and-so about it and they'd be talking about it at the kitchen table. And I'm like, okay, that's what I remember too. So it was so, so validating for me that at least my siblings remembered me saying something about it when I was 5, and they remember the story the same way I did. But it's just so interesting to me that my parents, were like looking at me like, what are you talking about? And since then, I've told, a little bit more of my story to my parents. They're not as, well, I'll just say this. My dad sometimes goes, if you are hearing voices, you need to go see somebody about that and stuff like that. I'm very open with my sister and my brother, but as far as I know, nobody else in my family has had any other experiences other than my dad having a sighting in the early 80s. And I remember it being a black triangle ship, and his cousin was there and two of his friends were there, and it was at a state park in the middle of the night, and it just kind of came over them. They were on a dock, and kind of came over them and stayed there for a bit and then shot off. So unless it's just that they don't remember their experiences, I mean, that could be the case as well, that they just don't remember. I have been told by a couple of channelers, because I'm so fascinated by the birthmark that I have that to me looks like a spaceship. And so I ask people about, like, what's the significance of it? Can you tell me any more? And I get varying answers, but sort of a common thread is, and I feel like this is what resonates with me, is it's like my identification mark, especially when we were little kids, because we're twins. I mean, our parents would get us mixed up. We looked so alike. It was really, really difficult to tell us apart, except for the birthmark on my arm. So if you weren't looking for the birthmark, you would really have no idea which one is which. So I feel like it was sort of my little marker that once they came to visit or whatever, that they could just look at my arm and go, oh, that's Allison. That's the one that we're here for, or whatever. At least that's the story I like to tell myself.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? And how would you say that this experience changed you as a person? Because I'm sure it did.
Definitely. And I realize, in the past couple of years, really the impact that it has had. Because since that time, it didn't really change my life much back then, other than I felt like I had a really cool story to tell people. But I didn't really feel the impact of it until I kind of grew up and started living, the life that a lot of us kind of fall into, which is work way too much and never have time for yourself. And everything's just really stressful, rat race type of life. And you start thinking about all the big questions you should be asking yourself. And, I started thinking about, well, I want to teach, and I want to work with kids, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And that's when I kind of had the realization about, well, that must be why the ET was sitting in the school desk. So that was I remember too, when I had that sort of epiphany, I was driving down the road, and as soon as I thought, I bet that's why I saw that, is because I'm supposed to be teaching. And I had full body chills. It almost caused me to wreck because it was so strong. Thankfully, I was sitting in the turning lane getting ready to turn, but it kind of made me jerk my hands a little bit. And to me, especially since then, whenever I get the full body chills like that, when I'm having some kind of thought or feeling, to me, it's like, oh yeah, that's my higher mind going, yep, that's exactly right. Yep, you're on the right, stream of thought. So that was pretty significant for me. And just ever since then, I've read so much on the topic, follow a lot of channelers and people that talk about, near-death experiences. I'm just super, super fascinated with what else exists besides what I can physically see with my eyes, what else exists beyond Earth, beyond humanity, beyond, whatever, because a lot of us are taught that, we're the only, we're the apex, species, and Earth is the only planet with life and whatever. Obviously, those, people are starting to expand their thoughts and being more open-minded, but it's a pretty constant endeavor that I am reading about or studying about or whatever, listening to people that are talking about this stuff, because it makes me really happy. I mean, it just lights me up, and I love talking to other people about it. And I always did, but it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I started actually sharing my own stories, because, you can feel very judged, obviously. And, I have a professional career in the financial industry, and I don't want those people to know, necessarily about these things, because they're just going to peg me as crazy, or that, I'm going through something, and, I'm not to be trusted, or whatever the case is. So it took me a long time to get to the point where I was able to share my story to people that weren't in my family, or that I knew were not already in, like, the UFO community, because I have talked a little bit with other people that maybe I didn't know previously, but they were in the UFO community. So I felt safe doing that. And ever since I started sharing my stories, kind of a little here, a little there, I feel like I'm having a lot more validation, I guess, from the universe that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. It's in alignment with who I am and all of that type of thing. And, lots of synchronicities and kind of things coming my way that I feel like are directly tied to this whole relationship that I am aware of that I have with ETs.
So, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I feel like I have a sort of a similar path to you, not really in terms of having experiences that I'm consciously aware of at 5 years old, but definitely this idea of, the need to share these experiences. I think that obviously we're in very different times now. Disclosure is pretty much upon us, as they say. So I think that especially now it's really the time, right, to come out and to share and to build these strong contact communities, because that is definitely what's happening all around us. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I know you have many others as well. I'm curious, David, did you have any other questions for Allison?
I just wanted to ask about, because Allison, when we were talking before, you mentioned that you had kind of a period where nothing happened. And I was thinking before, maybe you could go into just briefly what happened in your life, just so people understand. You mentioned it otherwise. In other words, between 5 and 40, let's say, when your stuff started happening again, how did your life develop, briefly? And then maybe you can jump straight into what your first encounter was once that started picking up again.
Yeah, that's actually a super interesting story. So you're right, y'all. Between 5 years old, so about 1989 or so, until January of 2021. So I was 37 at the time. I don't remember having any, experiences or memories or anything like that about anything like this. Of course, I would, read books and talk about it, but I didn't have any personal experiences. And so I, just sort of lived a very normal life. I, went to college and ultimately ended up in the banking industry and did that for about 22 years. And in the meantime, I, got married and have a daughter, have a stepson. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to do teaching. I wanted to work with children. So I kind of went part-time doing banking a little bit. I went back to school to get a degree in early childhood education, and I did all that. And I entered teaching for a short amount of time and then kind of went right back into the banking industry. I was able to kind of take over their training department, which I really enjoyed doing, also working with teaching adults. And that was really my life. It was, the most of what I spent my time on was working and just being with family. And we stayed really close to Central Arkansas for the most part. And I just figured this is, I'm going to retire here. This was going to be my sort of my life path. I really enjoyed, working with kids, but I was very comfortable with, the salary that I had and the life that I had, and the place that I worked for was 5 minutes from my house. There were a lot of conveniences with it. And so I just decided that this was what I was going to do. I will say one of the reasons I wanted to get into teaching as well as just working with kids is I've always had kind of an interest in writing children's books. So, that kind of became a more strong pull for me in 2020 when everyone was locked down. We're, me and my husband were working from home. The kids were doing school from home. And I could really see that just all around us and our kids, that being locked down really affected everybody's mental health. And it really kind of started getting me thinking again about what are these big picture questions that we should be asking ourselves. I honestly think 2020 was a great year for a lot of people to do that. And I definitely was in that population. And so I started thinking about writing children's books again and doing other things and maybe life coaching and just different things. So I was on a phase out plan at the bank I was working for. Well, that didn't really work out. We had a lot of sort of tumultuous times. It turned into a very toxic thing for me. I was working 80 hours a week, 7 days a week for months on end. And I got to where I just about couldn't take it anymore. And I remember this very specifically, and this leads into my experience that is sort of the thing that kind of broke the mold again. I hadn't had experiences at all, and then all of a sudden I had a really significant one. It was January the 29th, 2021, and I had been working like crazy. I was just having a really difficult time. I couldn't go to sleep that night. And so I was sitting there just meditating, my eyes closed, and all of a sudden, as I'm laying there, the air in the room kind of changed. Like I felt like there were people in the room. But at the same time, I didn't feel scared, which you say that and it's like, well, what do you mean? It's the middle of the night and all of a sudden you feel there's a presence of people in your room. You should be freaked out about it, but it wasn't like that at all. I was just laying there and thought, okay, something's different now. And so I opened my eyes, and so I sleep on the left side of the bed. My husband's on the right side of the bed. So on his side of the bed, there was an ET standing there, and it was kind of crouched down. I could only see it from like eyeballs up, but it had its hand outstretched across my husband's chest and was like reaching out, almost like offering me to take its hand or something. And I don't know if we have time to go into this whole story. I'll try to just hit the high parts here. But I did reach out and grab its hand. And then I got up from bed and was just standing there. And its arm just stretched. I mean, it was still standing up. We have a king size bed. It was still on the other side of the bed. It was still crouched down. I could only really see its eyes and forehead. But yet I'm holding on to its hand and its arm was stretching way out across the bed. And I said in my mind, wouldn't it just be easier for you to come over here? And as soon as I thought that, it was standing right next to me. And I was like, okay. And I started getting really excited because I've been, over the years listening to channelers like Bashar and, Wendy Kennedy and a bunch of different people and learning about different ET races. So I'm just spouting off like, oh, are you Yael? Are you Pleiadian? I mean, I'm just asking questions like an excited, 3-year-old or whatever that asks why all the time. And it didn't answer me or anything like that, but I could tell that it needed to calm me down. So it kind of put its head on my shoulder. And as soon as it did that, I just got quiet and very still and was like, I felt like I was being like cradled in a mother's love or something. It was really strange, just instant, like calming down. And it was really enjoyable. And this being was, I really wouldn't call it a typical gray. It was similar in size. So I'm 5'8", and it came about to my little above my shoulder. So I'd say it was maybe about 5'4". Skin was wrinkly. It had the quintessential, black, large almond eyes. But its skin was almost like a very glowing, soft pink color, very thin. I mean, it was dark in the room, but my eyes had adjusted enough to where I could, for the most part, make out its shape and things like that. And as soon as it put its head on my shoulder and I kind of calmed down and stopped, just rapid firing questions, I felt 2 other hands come from behind and kind of rest their hands on my shoulders. And I got actually really scared in that moment because I thought, oh, there's 2. And I didn't know there was 2 in here. I don't remember seeing the other one. And now like its arms are really close to my neck. And I thought, am I getting ready to be choked or something? It was a completely irrational fear, but at the same time, probably very rational because there's these things in my house in the middle of the night, And I wasn't fearful for very long. I kind of got over that and was like, you know what? This isn't, if they wanted to hurt me, they would have already hurt me. So I kind of turned my head to just look behind me to see like who's behind me. And I saw another one of them. It was really similar to the one that was on my right, except this one was a little taller than me. And, looked exactly the same other than being taller. And I was at this point holding both of their hands. And we start walking like through the room, and our bedroom is attached to a laundry room, and then it goes to our backyard. So we're kind of heading like we're going to go through the laundry room and ultimately go to the backyard. So at this point, once we start walking, I get really excited again. And I start asking all these questions again, like, where are you from? Where are we going? And all this type of stuff. And they kind of did that calm me down thing. I don't know if it was the frequency they were giving off or whatever, but I mean, they didn't look like they did anything special, but to me, it felt like they did something to help calm me down. And so I wasn't, I don't know, so excitable or whatever. And they were kind of looking at each other. And it's funny, like they weren't moving their mouths or anything, but I could hear like whispers in my head. Like they were talking to each other, but it wasn't loud enough for me to hear. And so I remember saying, "Can you speak up? I want to know what you're talking about." And after that, the only thing I heard was, "Okay." And then I didn't hear anything else. So before we didn't actually go through the door to the laundry room, we just started going up, like through my ceiling. And as soon as I couldn't feel my feet on the ground anymore, all of a sudden my sight was just gone. Like my eyes were open. I could still feel their hands and my hands touching. And one of them, the one on my right, had kind of put its arm around my waist. And we just started moving up, but I couldn't, everything was completely black. I couldn't see a thing. I could hear the ceiling fan whirring. I remember thinking as we were going up that, okay, I guess I'm dematerialized or something, because obviously you can't, as a solid person, go through your ceiling. But also my stepson's bedroom was right above ours. And I remember thinking, am I getting ready to like pass right through him? Like, I wonder if that's going to wake him up. That would be really, really stressful for my husband to wake up to my stepson screaming and wife missing and, what's going on. So I kind of was anxious about that. And then my eyes were dark like that for not very long, maybe 10 or 15 seconds. And all of a sudden I can see again, and I'm just in a new place. I can assume it was a ship, but I didn't see any such thing. I don't know how long we really traveled or where we really went, but all I know is I was in this huge, vast black space, but there were people there, like, I don't know, floating in the air, because I couldn't see that there was any type of floor, ceiling, walls, or anything. It was just everything was black. The only thing I could see were the people, and there was no light source coming from anywhere. So I don't know how they were illuminated and nothing else was, but they were all sitting in a circle and they looked like they were having some type of conversation. And they saw me like coming into the room and kind of stopped their conversation and looked at me and smiled, and a couple of them were laughing, and then they got back to their conversation, because apparently I was just passing through. So we keep traveling up and we get to another room where it feels like a real room to me. There are walls and a ceiling and a floor. Everything was a very like light, I don't know, seafoam green type of color. And I could feel now that, okay, my feet are touching the floor again. And as soon as I came into this room, there were humans in there as well, but they looked like they were being ever so slightly electrocuted. Like they were standing straight up, and their bodies, like their arms were down to their sides, and it's just like their whole body was just shaking a little bit. Like they were, I don't know, stuck and also shaking, and they couldn't do anything about it. And I remember thinking, oh, no. I do not want to go in that room. I don't want to be happening with what's going on with those people. I don't want to be like that, because they looked really uncomfortable. But as soon as my feet hit the floor in that room, it's like everyone snapped out of it and they all looked at me. And I just had this feeling of, I know who these people are, but I only know them here. I don't really know them in, quote unquote, real life down on earth or whatever. I only know them here. And it felt like, they were like waiting on me, like I was, the last one to arrive or whatever. And we just all start talking. It was like a family reunion. Everyone's walking around hugging, and it was just this great thing. And then they had us all stand in a circle. And the two ETs that had brought me were still in the room, kind of standing over to the side, just watching us. They weren't interacting with us at all. But at some point there was, they put us in a circle. And so we're standing there just looking at each other. And there was a gentleman who was like two people over to the right, that he was the only one in the room that I really didn't know. I wasn't quite sure who he was. And one of the ETs came over to me and pointed at him and said, "Do you remember who that is?" And I was like, "No." So they pointed him, and I I didn't know who he was. And so they just kept asking though. They're like, do you remember who that is? And I feel like I'm trying to come up with an answer, but I don't want to just make something up. And every time I would look at this gentleman, he would, like, I think I would know who it is, but then his face would slightly change. And then I'd kind of maybe think I know who that is. And then his face would slightly change. And that happened like 4 or 5 times. And I was getting really frustrated because they're asking me continually, do you remember who this is? And I did not have an answer for them, but I felt like I needed to provide some type of answer. And so all I could think of was, working at a bank over the years, I have met so many people and seen so many faces, and I am not great with names. And so I just said, I don't know. Do I know you from the bank? And as soon as I said that, I mean, in a split second, I was sitting back in my bed, sitting up, wide awake. Like, I don't know how I got back there. I looked at my phone to like check the time, like 45 minutes had passed. And I was just trying to think, like, what did I do wrong? I feel like I failed a test or something. So I was really self-judging myself in that moment and being like so excited, but then feeling like I let them down. Like I was supposed to remember who this was for some reason. The reason why this particular one I think was so significant for me is one reason I actually did meet this person in real life that I was supposed to know since then. I found who this person was through synchronicity, and he had reported to me that he had missing time on that same day. He's actually since passed away. That's a whole nother story, but that was validation for me that I mean, it felt real in the moment, but at the same time, you want validation on something that's so weird that happens in your life. And this next thing so that was like a Friday night at midnight. And the next day, Saturday, I'm working from home. It's like I kind of put that out of my mind. I'm just doing my normal daily routine on Saturday working. It gave me so much stress, and I resigned immediately from that position. I didn't give a notice. I returned all my equipment, and I just decided to leave that 20 plus years in this industry behind. And I did not put 2 and 2 together until months later that those 2 things actually happened within a 24-hour period. Like this whole ET experience happened, and then like that very night, I resigned from my job and started basically a whole new path for myself. And I didn't even realize it until much later that those 2 things happened on the same day, basically. And I don't think that's an accident. I think they let me remember that specifically so that I would like be shaken up or something to get out of a toxic situation.
Yeah, that's a common thing. And I thought it was fascinating that, you were given this connection or this person to identify and you couldn't. And then afterwards, you actually discovered them in real life, because that was going to be my next question, was that sometimes when you get to see these, co-abductees or co-visitated people, the idea that you can actually meet them in real life and identify who they are and see that they've had similar experiences, that's a very special kind of encounter, right? Because then you get the validation. And in your case, it totally changed your trajectory in life, right? Because
absolutely.
And then you ended up doing something very different afterward, right?
Right. So for about 2 years after that, I really didn't re-enter the workforce fully. I mean, I worked for another bank for a few months and then realized that, there was a reason why I got out of this to begin with. I didn't want all of that stress and just really wanted to kind of heal and self-reflect. So I did life coaching for a little bit, but I really started diving into, I want to write, and I started painting and getting into painting murals. And I do some financial consulting still, but it's just a few days a week. And then the rest of the time I can do what I really want to do, and I'm really passionate about, which is writing and talking to people about this sort of thing. And it's a really great balance that I have now. And I do a lot more meditation, and I have a lot more opportunities to continue figuring out who I am and where I fit in the grand scheme of this, because I don't really know, other than, I don't know, maybe I'm part of a hybridization program or something like that, but I feel like I have a lot more involvement than just that based on the experiences that I've had with a multitude of beings, and they all seem completely disconnected from each other.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's not going away. Keeps happening. So I might as well start paying attention to it and figuring out how is this benefiting my life and what do I need to do about it?
Yeah, and that stream of creativity that you suddenly experienced, wanting to write, paint, and do that sort of thing, that's a very common thing you hear after these sort of transformative contact experiences, right? Because that was a very different path for you, and it's very interesting that you could pursue that and go that direction afterward. You said also that this was the first of many encounters, and I don't know how many encounters you want to go through, but did you have regular encounters after this? Did it come with a regular frequency? Were they all similar, or how did that happen after that? If you want to sort of lead us up more to where you are now, and then I'll turn it over to Star after that.
Sure. I would say after that first one, if you will, in 2021, I started doing CE5 and doing a lot of star watching and like wanting it to happen again. And I learned about astral projection. I was just super, super interested in how can I actually create this myself or invite this into my life myself. And I feel like I had kind of some success because I had some astral experiences with some ETs, but it wasn't the same as that one in January because I was like, I want to feel like I'm in like my quote normal reality with them, even though it does feel a little different than normal reality. It is sort of that, like you were saying, sort of that altered, it's like the air feels different and your senses are just, everything's just slightly different. So, I had some, dreams and astral experiences, but I also in the last, well, it's been 3 years now since that, I've had probably a dozen or so. They're coming to my room and it's in the middle of the night and it's an actual physical experience. I don't always leave with them, or at least I don't remember that part of it. And I keep a log of it because sometimes I go back and read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen. I remember what was the lesson there or something. But as far as, not on any particular, predictable schedule, but I will say that for the last 3 years, every night, I could sense some type of presence in my room. A lot of times you just kind of feel like it's just one. And sometimes I feel like my whole room is just full of them and I can't see them. Sometimes it can be a little bit bothersome just because you feel like I want a little bit of a break from feeling that. Because I feel like I don't really know always what's happening. And especially if I'm involved in a hybridization program, I mean, I know that can involve a lot of physical symptoms and different things that can happen afterwards. And I try to think that, I'm not being hurt or anything. Sometimes things can be uncomfortable. So I do ask for breaks occasionally, and they always respect that. They always respect that. I will, not feel as many around or feel them around at all for, a couple of weeks on end or something. But I've, let's see, I don't know, 7 or 8 different types that I've seen, and they look very different. I've seen some that look like human children, but they have like large purple eyes. That's the one difference they have, or something. Or what they're wearing is something you wouldn't see somebody wear, or the skin color, skin texture, the way their head is shaped, or just their body generally is like they're humanoid, but clearly not human.
Like these hybrid children, people refer to some of them, the smaller ones, right? Mm-hmm. And then do the others look like anything recognizable that you would people readily talk about? Any types that people would know?
There's some where they don't let me see their face. So they will let me see them from the neck down. And I always ask, can I please just see your face? I promise I won't be scared, because to me, it's more scary not to see the face. I want to see the whole of them. But I feel like I've seen some beings that others might call reptilians, because all I can get from those ones are from the neck down. They have a greenish tint. Their bodies are very muscular, but also they're trim. They're not like bulky. But they don't ever let me see their face. So I feel like they would think it's scary or something. And then I've seen some I would say, or maybe similar to what people describe as Arcturian. or Pleiadian that have like the purplish, bluish skin, maybe a foot taller than me. So yeah, close to, I don't know, 6.5, 7 feet, slender, wearing like robe-like clothing, very gentle. And I've seen what the phase that I'm in right now, honestly, I know a huge lesson that I'm trying to learn right now is discernment. So I'm having a lot more memories flooding back, but I'm also asking them in the same breath, like, I want to know what's happening when it's happening. I don't need the screen memories because I'm trying to get over the fear. I want to know everything that's happening. It's kind of like they open the door, don't close it again. I want the door to remain open because I feel like I deserve to know what's happening. Even if in the moment I might feel scared or whatever, like I still want that knowledge. I think that that's, at least for me, what's fair to me. So I'll wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and I'll see something in my room and it looks like a human. And I immediately know that it's not because I can sense that difference in the air. And so I know I'm in that altered state. Because if it wasn't an altered state, I saw a human in my room that shouldn't be there, obviously I would freak out and scream and like call the police and, all of that. But if I see something in my room that doesn't look like an alien that I kind of recognize, then I know they're presenting themselves to me in a screening type way or whatever. So I'll just say to it, show me who you really are. And most of the time they do, and their appearance will change. And then all of a sudden they look like an alien. And I'm like, you could have just done that from the beginning. It's fine. But they'll try to distract me. So to do what they need to do. And I've found that sometimes the things they need to do, like if they're working on my body or doing something like that, it can be physically painful. So they will distract me with pleasant images. I mean, it's just different every time. The most recent one I've had of me remembering actually going with them was February of this year. And I went to just in my front yard. Like there was a ship in my front yard. So we didn't go very far and they actually let me walk. Because I asked them, I said, I can just follow you. I'm going to go with you. You don't have to hold my hand or whatever. And I even remember saying to them, if you let me remember all this, I'll be cooperative or whatever you need to do, but please let me remember. Because to me, that's the most important for me right now, is because I know I'm having them a lot, but I know I'm not remembering all of them. And that kind of bugs me. I want to know because I feel like it's so many different types of races that I'm interacting with that to me, it seems a little, I don't know. I just want to know it all. I don't want anything to be hidden from me. That way I can decide whether that's something I want to continue or not continue. I don't know if I have any power over it, but at least it'll give me more information.
Yeah, I feel like usually, it's a very human thing to want to know it all, as you say. And I can definitely relate to that as well. In my experience, though, they only give you what you're ready for, which is information usually comes a bit at a time. Then you start remembering things in your dream state or your actual experiences that you've had in altered realities and so forth. So it definitely is a process, but I'm sure the more we go on this journey and on this path, we will remember more, right? And speaking on that topic, I was actually curious, how would you say your path is going to be going forward after all these experiences you've had, after all these big transformations that you've gone through? How do you kind of see your life going forward from this point on?
Well, it's really important for me every day now to be very aware of what I'm creating. And I think that the best teachers I've had in my life have been channelers of extraterrestrial intelligence. So I'm going to continue gathering that information and trying to really understand who I am, what I want, and what I'm creating in this life. And I'm really involved now with particular channelers' messages. Bashar, who is channeled through Daryl Anka, and he's been channeling for 40 years. But they're doing a social experiment now for those who are interested and want to align with what he refers to as the Interstellar Alliance. And he puts out these monthly transmissions, and we get like a new step every month, and it's going to go for the next 24 months or so. So I'm getting involved with that because I feel like that's important. Like I want to shift to a version of Earth that is in alignment with more positivity, more, we're a global community instead of being separated and segregated and all of this war and negativity that's happening. My trajectory is to constantly stay aware of my mindset and being in the present and raising my vibration so that I can not just one day be in a world where there's open contact. That's part of it. But at the same time, I realize that I'm fully human and I want to experience what it means to be a human on Earth and the relationships I have with the people around me and be around like-minded people, from here on out, not re-entering any toxic environments or just doing something because that's the way everybody else has to do it. I'm really trying to see like where are the rules that don't apply to me in society that I can, break free from and learn from and just have a better life.
Well, that certainly sounds like, like the path we're all on. So it's very exciting. It's very exciting to hear these stories as well. It's funny, right? Like when this whole thing sort of came out, like in the 80s and 90s, like they were such isolated stories, I feel. And now it's just become this whole movement. And it's almost like the new normal, isn't it? It's like you hear everybody has all these experiences. So I think it's really important that we share them, that we talk about them, that we bring them out into the open, because I think, that helps us to integrate things more. And that in turn makes us ready for even more contact, more physical contact as we go. And yeah, that's definitely the path we're going down, right? For disclosure and full on ET contact with our family and friends. So on that note, Allison, I'm sure I can speak for David as well. We both thank you for coming onto our podcast and talking about your experiences. They've been very valuable and we appreciate hearing them. David, would you like to say anything? Anything to add?
Just another thank you to Allison, because I see this as being the start of a new reality where we all openly share these experiences and build a whole community, as you were expressing, Allison, which encompasses all those things you mentioned and much, much more as we see what we can create together in that synergy. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. And I'm very excited for this future as well. And if anyone listening is unsure of whether they should share their stories or not, like you both said, it is very important. I think since I started sharing a little bit just from that one Facebook video that I did a few weeks ago, I have since reconnected with some people that I thought really, never, they've had similar, I wouldn't say similar experiences, but they've had some experiences that they can sort of connect with me on that I never ever would have thought. It's now we have this whole new relationship. So it's been really a blessing.
Wonderful. Great. So we will wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for listening in. Once again, big thank you to Allison, David, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.